Calling the wake of the fourth industrial revolution. And it's a word or a phrase at least that keeps creeping up. And along with that is the concept of disruption. Tonight we're going to focus on digital disruption, which is defined as changes enabled by digital technologies that occur at a pace and a magnitude that disrupts established ways of value creation, social interaction, doing business, and more generally our thinking. Now that sounds like a lot of jargon. That's exactly why we need to have that conversation, because we need to unpack what all of that means. And it's my pleasure this evening, as I walk away to the set, to welcome Dr. Martyn Davies. Thank you very much for coming in. Let's have a sit and chat. Of course, in your position as the Managing Director of Emerging Markets and Africa at Deloitte, this is something you're all too familiar with. I gave a fairly long-winded explanation about what it might mean, but what is disruption, put simply?
Begani, thank you. We had our annual Deloitte risk conference today, hence it's very topical. We looked at risk through the lens of digital disruption, as you say, Industry 4.0, and how does business, but also how does government start to think about this what I call the velocity of our economy is significantly faster. Our personal lives, companies' interactions, our economy, and how do we start to make sense of this dramatic change that is very disruptive, very uncomfortable at times, but ultimately inevitable. And that 27.5% shocking figure you put out there, I'm afraid, is often collateral damage to the adoption of technology, especially manufacturing sectors, especially mining sectors, both of which have been mainstays in our economy traditionally.
And of course it creates all kinds of problems, because we know that education is a particular challenge for this economy. We know that many people who are part of that 27.5% are semi, if not downright unskilled. How do we begin to keep up then with the concept like disruption, digital disruption specifically, or are we simply going to be left behind?
You know, this was very apparent today. We had an official, so we had a number of sessions, panel sessions, one of which we had a representative from the Singaporean government. And the question was, how does public policy start to think about change, dramatic change? And they've done calculations on like 50% of our workforce may be unemployed by 2030. Now, are we having those hard conversations saying how do we create a workforce for the future? We can kind of predict where technology is taking us in the economy. We can kind of see where it's going, but ultimately how do we create our workforce? And the challenge, I find that figure is appalling. It's politically, it's economically, it's socially, it's morally. It's unacceptable.
Is there conversation with all stakeholders? Because, I mean, we're talking about the 27.5%. There are people who are employed today whose jobs may be redundant in a decade or so. Are we having a wider conversation about anticipating all those challenges that may come? Because from what I can make of it, that number will in fact grow.
Come back to the Singapore example. They've had 25 working groups across different sectors of the economy, leading business figures, CEOs of multinationals, domestic companies, small enterprise, with government, plotting out the future and saying, how does government create a better enabling environment for business? We had the CSIR today talking about our spend should be 10 times, our R&D spend to GDP should be 10 times existing spend, just trying to figure the future out. Research development spend on all things industrialization. We had Bosch from the automotive sector, one of Germany's leading sort of industrialized companies, talking about how their future and a lot of these we need to have these conversations. The things about South Africa is we're almost unique, and we have these very Industry 4.0 relevant conversations. At the same time, we have a large percent of our population living on social grants, and that's almost unprecedented globally. Our economy is moving at multiple speeds. How do we cater for the extreme first world part of the economy, while of course we have the very aspirational developing component as well?
There is a thought though that says, because of our unique problems, we might have opportunities to leapfrog what you might term traditional stages of development and find ourselves in some unintended way being competitive, because we'll come up with unique solutions nobody else has had to come up with.
You know, Magani, we had conversations, particularly at an individual level. You know, we had Kuseni Glimini, who's chairman of Massmart and Aspen Pharmaceuticals, talking about, he was saying almost at an individual perspective, one has to change one's entire career and thinking every 2 years to keep pace. At companies, we understand the continuous pursuit of competitiveness. Leapfrogging, you're talking about sectors, industries, more accurately countries. And according to the CSIR, their answer was power, of how renewable energy will result in significantly reduced power to industry, to companies. That, of course, at the same time will feed into enhanced competitiveness into things like water, for example, climate issues, climate change issues, into desalination, using renewable energy for desalination, water issues, Western Cape, think about that, are parts of the company ultimately solved. But energy underpins the development of economies, and they see that as a starting point. So without the sufficient energy inputs, Uganda was spoken about, other countries in our region, without essential energy creating competitiveness downstream, only then can you start to leapfrog and move on. But of course, we need that competitive ecosystem that you referred to, that ecosystem of competitiveness, where the government, sort of R&D, education, institutions, business are also aligned. And you know, our comparative disadvantage in this country is the disconnects across all of those.
I would say you need all hands on deck. We've had this big investment summit and we're selling old ideas, we're selling old solutions. Our problems going forward are going to be entirely different from what we can anticipate, and we've got to think about that in the future. Dr. Martyn Davies, thank you so much for popping in.
Thank you for your time.
A very fascinating discussion. We do need new ideas. All hands on deck, say I. What are your thoughts? #FullView on Twitter. We do welcome your views and your responses.